And so as more and more people are vaccinated, the opportunity for transmission will decline, and the opportunity to generate new variants will decline. Now, we're not done. I think COVID will last quite a long time. The next few winters will be cold, flu, and COVID seasons, and I think we can look for a recurring need for booster shots.
COVID, with all its evolving variants, will be with us for years to come. But the medical advances and adaptations we were forced to make when the pandemic began, they needed to be fast and they needed to be life-changing. But make them, we certainly did. But does this now mean in the decades to come that we are better prepared for the onset of another pandemic? To answer this question, I sit down with Dr. Erica Saphire, President of the Lo Jolla Institute for Immunology. Erica, thank you so much for spending some time with us this afternoon. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
Can you maybe give us a quick synopsis about where you think we are in the life cycle of this pandemic outbreak?
I think this pandemic is starting to wind down as the number of people vaccinated climbs higher and higher and higher, and we're now going to see the children becoming vaccinated. The population that's what we call naive or fresh meat to the virus will decline. And so as more and more people are vaccinated, the opportunity for transmission will decline, and the opportunity to generate new variants will decline. Now, we're not done. I think COVID will last quite a long time. I think it'll be, the next few winters will be cold, flu, and COVID seasons, and I think we can look for a recurring need for booster shots.
So that begs a bit of a two-part question then. Firstly, given we've just had COVID, are we now more prepared in the future for future pandemics? And then secondly, how do you think the response has been to this COVID pandemic, and what adjustments do we need to make in the future to make sure we handle them better?
Well, great questions. So there's two aspects of that. There's the social aspect of it, and there's the scientific aspect of it. The social aspect is that now that we fully understand that infectious disease can also be here, really always before, emerging infectious diseases were something far off somewhere else without expectation they would come onto our shores. Well, now it's abundantly clear that they can, and it's abundantly clear how rapidly a virus can spread. The other new thing this year is, I think, a growing appreciation among our entire population of the importance of the immune system and immunology. Right now that we're all very clear that new viruses can and will emerge, we're starting to see how many more there are out there that may yet spill over into human populations. We don't know what's coming next, but we do know it's the human immune system that's going to respond. And so this year, as we've watched with bated breath, will vaccines work? How will they be developed? How long will they last? What's the right formulation? How do we treat those people who can't be vaccinated? There's a growing appreciation of how the immune system can work and the power and the precision of the immune system in finding and destroying a completely novel virus that we've never seen before. So that's the sociological aspect. The scientific aspect is that we tested new platforms. We never had an mRNA vaccine before. Now we have that, and we have other platforms as well. We've also reset expectations of how we can move things forward. So before this year, the fastest vaccine that humans ever created was mumps, and that took 4 years. Well, this year we have vaccines within 1 year. And so it reset our expectation of finding those administrative barriers that we can reduce. So for example, instead of waiting to convene a meeting to review data, let's do it by Zoom. Instead of saying we need to jump through all the different hoops to know something will perfectly work, before we start manufacturing, we could say, let's assume if we get through these hoops, we know we're on a deadline, we're going to need refrigerated trucks, we're going to need syringes, we're going to need nurses with clipboards. Let's work through all those logistics so they're all ready to go when science has fully evaluated the vaccines that we want to mobilize.
So do you think, what do you think we got wrong this time around? Were we globally coordinated enough? Did we have enough infrastructure?
What we had built was really not bad. I mean, for science to be able to mobilize multiple vaccines within a year and to be able to generate international collaborations to mobilize protective antibodies, to mobilize small molecule treatments and pills, that's pretty good. And to have the infrastructure and the economy that's able to put government backing behind that. So, the investments in the research were why we have this. The ability of the government to take the risk in vaccine development so that a company wouldn't fail as they tried to protect humanity. That was why we succeeded. So a lot of things went well. And then, a lot of things in public health went well as well. In every pandemic we've ever had, going back to influenza outbreaks, we put in what you've got as you wait to develop a new vaccine. So masks and distancing. We resort to these measures, and we always have.
And one thing I wanted to ask as well, I'm obviously not an expert in this topic, but as we get a new variant of COVID-19, I was sort of under the impression that viruses have this selfish gene aspect where they just want to survive. So they want to become more transferable, but sort of less fatal.
Yeah.
But it seems like we got to the Delta variant and suddenly that was a sort of more potent variation of the virus. So am I right in thinking that every successive version of the virus is likely to be less fatal, or is that just not logical?
Well, there's a lot of interesting questions in there. So although we like to think about what do viruses want to do, they're inanimate. The more successful versions propagate. And as they copy themselves, they do generate errors. SARS-CoV-2 has some proofreading capacity, not complete. So it'll generate fewer errors than something like hepatitis C or Ebola or HIV. But it has created these errors and it has created these variants because there were so many millions of people replicating the virus at the same time. A virus will transmit more effectively if it's able to replicate faster, or if it's more successful in achieving a foothold in a novel person. And so those point mutations, the very small changes that gave the virus the ability to attach better to the human cell, or that created even small enhancements in its speed, its kinetics by which it replicates, have dramatic effects a couple of generations down. And so this is what happened with Delta. We first saw it with the first point mutation around February 2020 that emerged in Europe with a single D to G substitution that spread around the world in 1 month. And that was the wake-up call that more was going to come.
And that's all it took.
That's all it took. The variants, of course, are multiple mutations put together. And the danger is that because they are more efficient at attaching to your human cells, and they're more efficient at disseminating themselves within every person that catches that virus will grow faster and grow to higher level. And that's linked to some of the greater illness that we've seen.
Now, when we look at the world today, there seems to be a lot of mega trends that are going on, and one of them is AI, and one of the other ones is biotech, as in there's been huge steps being made in the world of biotech. Are there any areas which you're most excited by and working on, whether it's in virology or not? And also, are those areas of medical research getting the right funding?
So there's two things in biotech that I'm most excited about that mean that we're going to be able to stop future pandemics faster. One is our ability to rationally make better vaccines. It used to be that we just have to try things and hope for the best. Or we had really old techniques of just trying to chemically inactivate a virus and immunizing with that. And that meant that some of the vaccines that we tried to make didn't work. But now we have microscopes that can see what used to be submicroscopic. We can directly image what our target looks like, and it gives us the roadmap for how to craft that vaccine. So a vaccine's like a wanted poster, right? It puts a picture of the criminal out there for everyone to see. So what it's doing is showing your immune system, this is the foreign body, get a response ready for this. If we have those microscopes that can give us those images, if we know exactly what the target is, if we know how to engineer a vaccine that can faithfully and reliably mimic that, we're going to get a successful response. And that's something we never had before, the ability to craft and design and engineer a better vaccine. The second improvement in biotech that I think is going to launch us forward and protect us the next generation are some of these big data approaches. And there's two ways of using that. One's on the virus side, and one's on the immune side, the immunology side. So on the virus side, we can do deep sequencing to look at all the variants that are there within a person. We can map individual viral transmission events and know that this virus came from this event, which came from that event, which came from this event. So that gives us public health strategies to mitigate viral spread. But then on the immunology side, this is where it's really exciting and it's really important. There's always a mystery about why one person gets sick and another doesn't. Why do some people get severe COVID and they're hospitalized, they're intubated, and other people asymptomatic?
Are you going to tell us now? Because we all want to know.
So we do know, we're starting to know. What we are able to do at LJI is to do these big data approaches of actually see what are the different immune genes in different people. What is their prior exposure history? You know, if they've recently had one of the related viruses that causes the common cold coronaviruses, we can figure out exactly which components of their previous immune response are protective now. By mapping which people got sick, which people didn't get sick, which people could clear the virus, exactly what components of that incredibly complex immune response led to that protection, we can design that better for other people.
So it is in part a data thing. It's like the more data you have, the more you have the ability to fight future viruses.
Yes, and it's not just the amount of data, it's how you can use the data, how you can share that data. So one of the professors that I work with, Bjorn Peters, he's an expert in figuring out, it's not just the massive data, but how you call it and how you use it and how scientists can share it by giving things the same name so that we can make those databases interoperable and reusable. We're able to share that information. And that global sharing of scientific information is something we had in this pandemic that we never had before.
Step in the right direction.
That's right.
Now, you mentioned public health just now. I think we all need to spend more time washing our hands and so forth. But is there anything you feel that will change permanently now that we've had this pandemic and we need to kind of alter our behavior in terms of trying to reduce any spread of disease?
Well, there are three things that happened in this pandemic. One was the realization that infectious disease is everyone's problem. It's not just something somewhere else. Things can move around the globe within 24 hours, and we are all vulnerable, and we're all susceptible. The second is the appreciation of the ability of science and the immune system to defeat these things, to be able to understand why one person has become sick and another has defeated this virus, how you can develop a vaccine and how you can evaluate these responses. We've set better expectations of wanting to have platforms and information and sharing those informations, and an expectation that we will be able to develop the drugs and vaccines that we need. We've also done something else in this pandemic that's kind of a thought or new approach, which is to not just say we need to shut down for a whole year until we make one vaccine against one virus, but to anticipate, done, got platforms in place, but we know there are dozens and dozens of other coronaviruses out there. We can expect that one will spill over. We know there are dozens and dozens of different versions of influenza virus, different paramyx of viruses, different things like Ebola.
So when you say there are dozens of other coronaviruses out there, do you mean in other animals within the animal kingdom, and you think it's inevitable at some point they will spill over from whatever animal to us?
Yes, most novel viruses do spill over from an animal species to us.
And is there any way we can we can stop that? We can stop it getting in towards the human species?
It's really difficult. So we interact with animals and insects everywhere in the world. And we need those insects to pollinate our food or else we'll starve to death. And we need those birds, we need those bats. But everywhere in the world, and with the global population encroaching in wild areas, it's inevitable that we will mix with these things. The best thing we can do is understand how to support the human immune response. And to understand that here's a class of viruses, and here's another class of viruses, there's a third class of viruses. We don't know which one's going to spill over next. We know something will. But if we can make broadly active vaccines and broadly active therapeutics, we can have something that's pretty good, ready to go. And we know that what's in common among all these different pathogens that might emerge is that the human immune system needs to respond to them. We know how to support that human immune system to survive.
Now, Erica, if I can ask you a bit of a crystal ball question. So looking out into the future, 3 or 4 years out, what are the kind of progress we would have hoped to have made in the world of medical research? And what do you think will be the big issues we're talking about in your space?
You know what's really interesting right now? Science is just beginning to realize the difference between males and females in our immunology and in our immune system.
Is that right?
Yeah, it is. And this is something we've always seen in our own households, right? When the flu comes around, dad is down for the count in bed, but mom gets up and she's soldiering on and she's making the soup and going to work, right?
Same in my house.
Yeah, it's a real thing.
Okay.
Males suffer more significantly from infectious disease than females. Females mount a different, more powerful immune response. So
that makes sense from a nature point of view because of childbearing.
We're built to survive.
Right.
Okay, but there's something genetic, and it's every cell in your body. Every cell is either XX or XY.
Yeah.
You know, not just reproductive cells, all cells. And there are a lot of immune genes that are encoded on that X chromosome. So females have twice as many copies. So they've got twice the repertoire. They've got twice the palette to paint from. Now, one of those X's is inactivated most of the time, but not always. So sometimes the female cell is expressing twice as much of that. And so with a certain dose of something, a female immune response can be more powerful. And so males have twice the amount of circulating virus in HIV infection and hepatitis B. And the biggest risk factor for dying for COVID in many public health studies is being male. And at the same sense, women are less likely to die from cancer, but women are much more likely to get autoimmune disease.
Right.
You know, when that more powerful immune response can turn on self. And so understanding those differences, I think, is where science is going in the next couple of years.
Interesting. There
are a lot of immune-based therapies that work differently in the different genders. There are some for which females keep dropping out of therapy because they get twice the adverse effects, but it works great in the males. There are other therapies that only work in females and have no effect in the males. So if we can understand at the genetic level why, what are the different populations and abundance of cells that are doing this? What are the molecules that are mediating these effects? Are they hormones? Are they proteins? Are they, you know, what is that? We can tailor vaccines and therapeutics that are going to help all people.
So you mentioned it does take often years to come up with a vaccine for certain viruses. So how were you able to come up with one so quickly for COVID-19?
Well, science was able to move faster by building on the body of information done before, that body of fundamental research. So the first coronavirus anybody worked on was mouse hepatitis virus. And it used to be you couldn't get a grant to study coronaviruses because coronaviruses don't cause human disease. That's what people thought 30 years ago. But that early research that people had done on coronaviruses that only infected animals gave us that first amount of information that science needed to fight SARS when it emerged in 2003. And those efforts to develop vaccines against SARS gave us the first trajectories of how we might start when SARS-2 emerged decades later. Now SARS-1 went extinct. It emerged, it spread, it stopped. And because SARS-1 stopped, funding for continued development of vaccines against coronaviruses stopped. Now, decades later, scientists were able to, keep some of that research going along, but at a smaller pace. And it was on those ideas and those original coronavirus experts that were able to launch forward the new programs. But it's very much that fundamental research and that body of information that we can put into the literature and into databases that we can draw from to catapult forward when something new does emerge.
Out of interest, do you know why the SARS virus just died and why COVID doesn't seem to?
Some of it has to do with the lethality of the virus. That if something is 30% lethal, people are more afraid of it. They stay home, they stay away from each other. If something is 1% lethal, people aren't as afraid of it. It also has to do with the incubation period. If you get sick quickly, you stay home quickly. If you don't know you're infected and you're happily walking around asymptomatic, you might be unwittingly sharing that virus without having any idea. And so SARS-2 spread quickly around the globe because there's so many asymptomatic infections that we don't know that it's there. And also its lethality is much lower. In some ways, it's always been said that the biggest pandemic is not going to be one of these 90% lethal hemorrhagic viruses, but instead something that's 1 to 3% with so many people that can be infected and not have any idea.
Right.
and something that spreads by the respiratory route.
Right. Well, Erica, it's been so great chatting to you. Everything that's happening at LJI, I think, I guess the world is thankful for helping us and preventing us from future pandemics. So just wanted to say thank you so much for chatting, and it's been great.
Thank you for your time.
The COVID-19 pandemic, with all its variants, has caused havoc to everyone's life. But when we look back, it's critical that we both applaud the pace of our response and learn from it, so that the next generation can be even more decisive in dealing with future pandemics. If you'd like to read more on the topic, please go to FTSERussell.com/research for more information.